In today's show, we continue our season preview series looking at Jerami Grant. What's his fit and his future with the Trail Blazers? Welcome to Locked On Blazers. Let's get into it.
You are Locked On Trail Blazers, your daily Portland Trail Blazers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
What's up, world? It's your past first point guard and Trail Blazers reporter, Mike Richmond. You are listening to another episode of Locked On Blazers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, available wherever you get podcasts and also on YouTube. Thanks for making this show your first listen, coming at you each and every weekday. That's 5 days a week, Monday through Friday. So make it a part of your daily routine. Make it your first listen. Tell your friends to do the very same as Locked On Blazers, your team every day. In today's episode, we are continuing with our season preview series, giving you a brief but thorough look at every player on the roster. We'll talk about what they did last season, best and worst case scenarios for the upcoming season, and role and expectations moving forward. This week, we're isolating at 9 feet, talking Jerami Grant. Let's talk about what Jerami Grant did last season. We'll look back to look ahead. That's what we do here in these previews. If you have missed any of the other ones, they're in your feed. If you're a YouTube viewer, there is a playlist, a season preview playlist, and you can go look at all of them. If you are an audio user, they are labeled season preview. If you're an audio listener, they're labeled season preview in your feed. Go back and check your feed. This is a great place to jump in. If you are a new listener, we're going to do this for everybody on the roster. So this is a great place to jump in and kind of, you're like, I think I like this dude. Does he have good opinions? This is a place where you can hear, I'll break down everything I kind of think about every single player on the roster. And this is a good spot to sort of familiarize yourself with me, familiarize yourself with the team, and a great jumping off point, hopefully evergreen content. Okay, let's get into Jerami Grant. Last season, his second season with the Portland Trail Blazers, averaged 21 points, 3.5 boards, 2.8 assists across 54 games, played 33.9 minutes a night. A cool 34 minutes a night for your starting forward, Jerami Grant. 45% from the field, 40.2% from three on 5.1 attempts per game, and 81.7% from the free throw line. He was mostly what he had been the season before. There were some big nights in there, including a 49 8-6 game against his former team, the Detroit Pistons, a game the Blazers lost. He had his moments where we were reminded, the viewers were reminded that Jerami Grant can still go get buckets when you need him to. And there were moments when Jerami Grant kind of faded into the background. But in general, his dependability of what he has grown into over the past 4 seasons as a dude who's going to score 20 points per game and shoot 40% from three. And that's that, and you can kind of book it. He doesn't do a lot of other things, but he's not a rebounder, not much of a playmaker, but dude scores 20 points with relative ease and shoots pretty darn well from three. What really changed for Jerami Grant was that Damian Lillard left and he got super duper paid. Not exactly in that order, but close to it. Grant in July agreed to a 5-year, $160 million contract that includes a player option for the 5th season. That kicked in to begin this year. But the production didn't really change. What in the sort of the raw production is relatively similar. What changes a little bit of his shot diet. Real quick on the contract thing. People outside of the market think that the Blazers signed Jerami Grant under the impression that Damian Lillard was going to stay, or perhaps as a last lure for Damian Lillard. That is not at all my read. What happened, if you remember the timeline, is that on Tuesday of that week, Damian Lillard sat down with Joe Cronin and Dame's agent Aaron Goodwin, and they met for extended period of time, 3 hours or something like that. And then on Friday was the first day of the moratorium, and the Blazers agreed to a contract with Jerami Grant, verbally agreed to a contract with Jerami Grant that Friday. And then the following Saturday morning, July 1st, Damian Lillard requested a trade formally. What the heck do you think happened in that Tuesday meeting? You think Joe Cronin didn't know that Damian Lillard was very likely to be requesting a trade later in the week? The Blazers signed Jerami Grant because they didn't want to lose him for nothing. It's what John Hollinger calls the bird rights trap. If they let him go, they don't magically get cap space. They just kind of traded for someone and they let him walk. This was in their ways asset preservation. And Jerami Grant's pretty good. The contract's a little big, a little long, but Jerami Grant's pretty good, and they wanted to keep him on the roster. So what changed functionally for Jerami Grant as a basketball player was that he just took a lot more mid-range shots. his 3-point rate declined a little bit, but like where that went was that he took more shots between 4 and 14 feet. So like not quite at the rim, but not long mid-rangers, just mid-rangers. Some of that is Jerami Grant's comfort level, because that's where he wants to operate. Some of that was just the way that the sort of at times very simplistic Trailblazers offense under Chauncey Billups just said, okay, throw it into the post and get out of his way, let him go. And some of it was because the Blazers didn't have enough offensive creators that there was like the best chance for them to score, at least in Jeremy's eyes and perhaps maybe in some of his teammates' eyes, was like, give me the ball at 17 feet and I'll go to work. And Grant just took more bad shots in his second season. That's basically what changed. He's just shot a little bit worse on 2-pointers in his second season than he did in his first season. The production is nearly identical. He took more tough shots between 4 and 14 feet. Those are challenging shots, and he didn't make as many. His 3-point rate dipped. His rebounding rate dipped to the lowest of his career. But in general, the production was there for Grant. Coming into his second season with the Blazers, he had a career rebound percentage of 8.1%. Not particularly good. Like that, he's not a good rebounder for his position. Like people get caught up on what position he plays. I think he's mostly a power forward just because of foot speed at this point in his career. But like he could play either forward spot. But regardless, someone his size, who's like kind of a 4 with an 8% career rebound rate is pretty bad. He's never been a good rebounder, and he's certainly gotten worse at it over the last 4 seasons in terms of just like grabbing rebounds. Rebound percentage is the percentage of available rebounds you grab. Career 8%. Not great. It's bad. Below average for his position, according to Clean the Glass every season of his career. And then his first year in Portland was 7.2%. So a little bit below his career average, but like in the same range. Last season, 5.8. Like I mentioned, so he's the worst rebound percentage of his career, rebounding at the worst rate of his career. His 3-point rate dips to the lowest since the 2017-2018 season. Basically, he's like kind of morphed into a really good shooter late in his career, like a dependable 40% shooter, and he just stopped shooting as many threes with regularity. He traded those all in for mid-range jump shots. And yet, even with all those warts, he's never been a playmaker, never been really a rebounder. But like with all of those warts, he's a 21 3-3 guy and 40% shooting, and he's got some defensive ability when he taps into it. I think Grant's year 2 was worse than his year 1, but I also think he played on a team in Portland, that is. But I also think his year 1 in Portland was a more talented team than his year 2 in Portland. And now with 4 years and about $130 million remaining on his contract, you kind of look like, is he part of the plan? He's the oldest player on the roster. It becomes curious where Jerami Grant fits exactly. But before we get too deep into where he fits and how it all works, I want to talk best and worst case scenarios. Jerami Grant has some real utility, but where is that utility best served? And what does a worst case scenario Jerami Grant look like? That's what we'll talk about in the second segment. Join me there, won't you? First, though, I want to tell you about FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. FanDuel wants to hook it up. They want to give you a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket. But you got to act this week, because now through September 22nd, all customers, new customers, old customers, returners, first-timers can bet $5 and you get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. You just got to check out FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Then once you make your $5 bet and you activate your 3-week trial, all you're going to need is a YouTube TV base plan. Then you'll be able to watch every regular season Sunday afternoon out-of-market game. All you need is a Google account and a current form of payment, and you can cancel anytime. So take advantage of it. Check out America's #1 sportsbook. I've mentioned this a couple times, but the Blazers are going to be available on YouTube TV to watch this year. So maybe it could be the double switch that you're looking for. Just visit FanDuel.com to download America's #1 sportsbook. All right, let's talk best and worst case scenarios. What we do in the second segment is talk best case scenarios within reason and worst case scenarios without injury. For veterans like Jerami Grant, it's narrow. And for what Jerami Grant does, if you just look at his last 4 seasons, 2 in Detroit and 2 in Portland, he's just going to do what he does. The the difference between best and worst Jerami Grant is subtle. Like, I don't even think, I mentioned like that I thought he was a little bit worse in year 2 than he was in year 1, but I don't think outside observers really know that. I think it's you, dear listener, someone who pores over Jerami Grant games, someone who's like really in the weeds. For the rest of the world, well removed from the weeds, watching one Blazers game a month, they don't know what Jerami Grant is. They have no idea. And I think that's because he's relatively consistent in his production. And by relatively, I should have said extremely consistent in his production. So what's the best case scenario for Jerami Grant? It's that he rebounds back at his career rate, right around 8%. He continues to shoot the ball at 40% from 3, which he's done for 3 consecutive seasons with. And one time I was talking to him about it, and he said 4. I was like, you're rounding up a little bit. So he continues to shoot the ball. It has rounded up 4 consecutive seasons. And he improves his 3-point rate, trades in some of those tough 11-footers for some catch and shoot 3-pointers, or at least, if you're going to take a tough pull-up jumper, make a tough pull-up jumper from 3, because those are really hard at 9 feet. There's a lot of defenders in there. He rebounds at his career rate, still below average, but much better. He continues to shoot the ball well, and that the additions of guys like Denny Avdia and Tumati Kamara allow for Jerami Grant to get back into a more natural defensive position as a help side guy and as a guy who guards just the slower wing, whoever that is, and doesn't have almost any, very, very limited primary ball handler defensive responsibilities. He plays a role that fits him on defense. He settles into a role that is more effective and efficient on offense, and he does what he does. The best case scenario for Jerami Grant is instead of averaging 21, 3-3, he averages 22, 4-4. Jerami Grant's going to do what he does, and the best case scenario just looks like the slight tweaks. A few more 3-pointers, a few more rebounds, a little more engaged on defense, and that's what you're going to get from him. The best case scenario for Jerami Grant is that he is a useful veteran, that when the Blazers want to play functional lineups that allow for positive developmental minutes for the young parts, Jerami Grant is the answer to all of those useful lineups. As long as JG's in there, they'll be able to be functional because he can shoot and he can defend, and that'll help grease the wheels for everything else the Blazers want to do. What's the worst case scenario? I honestly think it's just a repeat of last season. It's just a repeat of last season. The shot diet remains a little bit questionable, with a lot more challenging mid-rangers traded in for 3-pointers. He continues his trend of rebounding at a career low rate, and that his defense continues to be more theoretical than functional. The worst case scenario is that Jerami Grant averages 21, 3-3. Because that's what he's going to do. Maybe 23-3, but that's what he's going to do. Grant's production is so dependable, and what he does is so bankable that the box score production between the worst Jerami Grant and the best Jerami Grant is incredibly slim. What changes is the subtle stuff. Perhaps he, I think he was kind of misused in his first year as a defender. But I thought he was more engaged as a defensive player in that first season in Portland. Like, the Blazers just were putting him in as hey, you're going to guard point guards and navigate screens and be a primary defender against guards. And he just, that was a bad look. That was just a misread on his skill set, I believe, from the coaching staff. They didn't have a lot of other options, but certainly putting in Jerami Grant in that position was a bad choice. So I think maybe his impact numbers suggest he was worse, but his role was worse as in year 1. I thought his role got a little more ironed out in year 2 with the additions of Matisse Thybulle and Tumati Kamara, and kind of giving those, not chasing it as much and letting hey, Scoot Henderson and Anfernee Simons and Malcolm Brogdon, you can just guard those dudes and we'll come what may. I thought that the role made more sense in year 2. So his impact stats maybe suggest he was a little better, but to me, I think he was a worse defender in year 2. But it's a subtle change. I talk a lot about shooting on this podcast. I don't think every single player needs to shoot 3-pointers, but if you shoot as well as Jerami Grant, taking 6 instead of 5 has value. We're talking one more 3-pointer a night. We're talking trading in one tough 11-footer for one 3-pointer. That's the best version. That's the difference in best and worst case scenario, is really subtle changes like that. I don't think he's going to morph into a high-level rebounder. That's why, the best case scenario is that he averages, grabs about 8% of the available rebounds, 7.5%, 8% of the available rebounds, and not below 6, not the worst rebounding season of his career. It's little stuff like that. It is the simple things. I don't think he's going to morph into a better passer. He had a higher assist percentage last year in year 2 than he had in year 1, which was a surprising thing to learn. But I don't think watching it felt like Jerami Grant was like unlocking a level of playmaking that he had not previously found. He does what he does. He likes to take ISO shots. He likes to score in isolation. He likes to post up. He likes to fade away. He's pretty good at grifting and drawing fouls when he wants to, but he doesn't always hunt that contact. He's going to score 20 points per game. He's going to shoot 40% from 3. It's all of the other ancillary parts of his game that are going to determine whether Jerami Grant hits the best case scenario or worst case scenario. And the difference in best case scenario and worst case scenario might also be what his trade appeal looks like. Because if you and I, dear listener, can pick out like, hey, Jerami Grant's not as good on defense as he could be. Like he's not as locked in and as interested in playing defense as he could be. Or boy, he's just like he could just be more physical and go get, another rebound, like 2 rebounds a week is kind of what we're talking about. Like we're not talking about a big jump in like box score number of rebounds, but like be more physical in pursuit of rebounds, particularly offensive boards. Like just like, go be active as a crasher on a team that has basically no rules about who can crash. You know who can crash? Anybody. But like if Jerami Grant is the little things, right? If he is a better defender because Denny and Tumani allow him to settle into a role that makes sense. If he is a more active rebounder because he kind of like on a team that was just bad last year, he didn't always bring it with that type of like the small stuff energy. And he continues to be a dude who scores 20 a game and shoots 40% from 3. He will have value around the league as a trade chip. And while I think that Jerami Grant is just like will be helpful, as I mentioned, the best case scenario, helpful to a young Blazers team that wants to play functional lineups, right? They're going to need shooting. They're the worst shooting team in the league last year, and they lost Malcolm Brogdon and replaced him with Denny Avdia. That is a downgrade in shooting. They're the worst shooting team in the league last year that maybe got worse shooting the ball, like as just sort of overall talent level of shooting the ball. Denny Avdia is probably better than Malcolm Brogdon. We shall see, but like at that particular thing, worse, right? They're going to need Jerami Grant to shoot it. They're going to need Jerami Grant to be the guy who plays in a bunch of minutes because he answers, okay, well, how do we get shooting on the floor? Shooting and size at the same time. He's the guy who answers that question pretty much universally across the board. They're going to need him. He's going to help them be functional. But some of the best case scenario for Jerami Grant is also like, does he improve enough to appeal to other teams and such that he is not a Portland Trailblazer, but he morphs into something that helps the next version of the Portland Trailblazers be good. And that's part of the role and expectations I want to talk about in the third segment to close the show. It is undeniable when discussing Jerami Grant's fit and role and expectations in Portland that trades are part of it, just because of the nature of where this team is at. Let's put the tiger on the table and yell at it. Join me in that third segment, won't ya? First, though, let me tell you about Gametime. It's the place for last-minute tickets. I like Gametime because the app is super easy to use and super clean. It looks great and it's quick. With a couple taps, I'm searching for sporting events in my area. I'm mostly going to soccer games like Timbers and Thorns. I haven't been to a Blazer game as a fan in like a cajillion years, but you certainly can. You can also go to comedy shows and live theater and concerts. All of that is available on Gametime. And I like it because with a couple clicks, you get exactly what you're looking for with a quick search. Then you get a look at the venue, and what you see is what you get pricing. If you toggle on the all-in pricing on the app, if you turn that on in the app, then you won't get any surprises. If it says it's going to cost you $71, guess what? It's going to cost you $71. There's going to be no surprise fees if you turn that all-in pricing. Plus, you can get a view from your seat. So if you're unfamiliar with the venue, you can literally click on a little image and say, "This is exactly what it's going to look like if I sit in this seat and look out onto the field or out onto the stage or whatever it might be." So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and use the redemption code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off. As a hint, all lowercase, LOCKEDONNBA, all lowercase for $20 off. Download Gametime today. What time is it? It's game time. All right, still a pass first point guard. I'm still Mike Richmond, and you are still listening to Locked On Blazers. Let's talk role and expectations for Jerami Grant. Here's the thing. He's going to start at forward. I mentioned this early in the show. People get hung up on what position he plays a little bit more than I care to. Here's how you know what position he plays. Who's playing next to him? If Deni Avdija can guard the bigger players, Deni Avdija is playing 4. If Jerami Grant is asked to guard the bigger players because Deni Avdija is guarding the primary ball handler or the faster wing, Jerami Grant is playing the 4. Like, the interchangeableness of 3 and 4 are kind of, it's like role versus positions type of thing. Like Jerami Grant's going to play forward, and what he's going to need is a little bit of help at those forward spots to cover up some of his deficiencies. In theory, the playmaking and rebounding ability of Deni Avdija greatly complements what Jerami Grant does, right? But he's going to have to play next to Toumani Camara. He's going to have to probably play a little bit next to Matisse Thybulle, maybe some next to Shaedon Sharpe, some next to Jabari Walker, and maybe some Chris Murray minutes in there too. And those gentlemen, whoever is here next to him, how you'll know what position each one of them is playing is who they guard and kind of what their role is. Moreover, are they like the role, who do you guard and what do you get done? Kind of dirty work stuff. Like when Jabari Walker would get in there and grab rebounds and guard the slower of the forwards, he was playing the 4. I think that's kind of the best way to think of it. But I'm not too worried about what position you think Jerami Grant plays. If you're screaming he's a 3 and shouldn't play the 4 and Deni should play the 4, fine. They're both going to start at forward. We'll just figure it out when we get there. I think that distinction is not particularly meaningful, but when you recognize the deficiencies and the skills, both in both directions, both the positives and negatives of what each player brings, then you can start to talk about their role and what roles are needed, as opposed to obsessing over who is playing the 4 and who is playing the 3 in sort of an undefined amorphous forward position. Jerami Grant's going to start at forward. He's going to play 33 minutes a night. That's his role. And I expect him to score 20 points per game, grab about 3.5 rebounds, dish out about 3 assists, and shoot 40% from 3 on 5.5 threes a game, 6 threes a game. He'll just do what he does. It's the subtle differences that'll determine whether he hits the best and worst case scenarios. The production in the box score will be very simple. But you cannot talk about Jerami Grant, or I will not talk about Jerami Grant, without acknowledging the obvious. He is not exactly the age fit for what's next for the Blazers. Grant's under contract for 4 more seasons. I don't think the money is that big, including this upcoming season. I don't think the money is that big. Like I'm not too worried about the total dollar value, but it's 4 years of Jerami Grant, which kind of makes a team trading for him have to say, do we want 4 years of Jerami Grant? Or if they trade for him in February, do we want 3.5 years of Jerami Grant? Is that something we're interested in? I think he's only going to be 34 at the end of his at the tail end of that contract. He's not going to be ancient by any means, but 34 is old in the NBA world. That's older, I should say, in the NBA world. I know that the best players in the league seem to be playing into their 40s now, and Steph Curry and Kevin Durant and certainly LeBron have kind of changed our opinion of what guys should be like in their late 30s, but 34 is a little bit older. The back half of that contract is an older Jerami Grant, and it's a long-term Jerami Grant. If the Blazers were closer to competitive, however, if they were just straight up better this season or closer to being a competitive team than they are and as currently constructed, I think there would be no real incentive to trade Jerami Grant. He's not in the way. I've said this a bunch. He's not in the way. Jerami Grant is not blocking some young player from playing. There are still tons of minutes for Deni Avdija to play. There's tons of minutes not tons, but there's plenty of reasonable minutes for Toumani Camara to play. There's not a ton of minutes for Matisse Thybulle. Jabari Walker and Chris Murray are kind of squeezed out of the rotation, but is the future of the Blazers franchise harmed if Jabari Walker and Chris Murray have to earn minutes like ahead of Jerami Grant? I don't think so. And like I mentioned before, Jerami Grant's skill set, the shooting and the size will allow the Blazers to play more functional lineups. He's not like a negative with the Blazers, and he's not blocking any young player from playing. There isn't like this great incentive, like they have to trade him because he's in the way. Last year when they had too many guards, like when they had 4 guards that all needed to play 28 plus minutes, they kind of did need to sort that out and sort itself out with injuries. But that's not what Jerami Grant is. He's not in the way of anyone. He's not blocking anybody. He's not clogging up the plan. He's like going to be helpful when he plays because of his skill set, and there's no one behind him that is demanding minutes that he's in front of. but it would make sense if the Blazers shopped him. I said at the trade deadline last year, it would have made sense if the Blazers should actively try to trade Jerami Grant. And I said that back in February or whatever. I guess probably even January of last year. I thought this summer it was important that they try, if not straight up outright trade Jerami Grant. I was very much in favor of them trading one of Jerami Grant or Anthony Simons. They traded neither of them. They're running it back. And there were some discussions with Grant and the markets. The Lakers were seriously interested in Jerami Grant, and the reporting suggests that the holdup was basically that the Lakers have 2 tradable first-round picks, and the Blazers asked for both of them, and that was a non-starter, and so they didn't get deeper into the conversation. Since then, LeBron James has signed a contract. The math for getting Jerami Grant to the Lakers has changed enough such that it's not a very easy trade. But I can see why the Lakers wouldn't trade 2 picks for Jerami Grant. I straight up wouldn't trade 2 unprotected picks for Jerami Grant. That seems like an overpay. But if you're the Blazers, you start by asking for that and then move from there, right? So that seems like a reasonable negotiation and a very believable way in which that fell apart. Jerami Grant could help a good team. His production could help a good team. And if the Blazers were closer to being competitive, there would be no real incentive to trade him whatsoever. The problem is that, when you're in a rebuild, you have to kind of make these tough decisions. Is this dude good? Yes. Okay. How good do we think he'll be in 3 seasons? And what are the opportunity costs of holding on? If we're going to be good in 3 seasons, what is the opportunity cost of not trading Jerami Grant between now and then? And what could you get in exchange, right? And I think that's the sort of the value proposition for the Blazers. Is Jerami Grant more valuable as a trade piece than he is as a veteran that helps and a veteran on the next version of the Blazers that's good? And to me, it's obvious that he would have more value as a trade chip. Obvious that he would have more value as a trade chip because the Blazers are far enough away from being good that trading players with positive trade value for assets has to be their near-term goal. There is some point in the future, hopefully, when they have some clarity about who's going to be good, when they can move from the accumulating stuff portion of the program to the go try to win games portion of the program. Boy, am I ready for the go try to win games portion of the program. I record 250 of these things a year about the Portland Trail Blazers. You better believe I'm ready for them to try to win basketball games. But pragmatically, that's not the time to do that is probably not right now. They're not quite there. It stinks, but they're not quite there. And Grant is probably more valuable, in my opinion. I keep saying this on my solo podcast. Believe it or not, these are my opinions. I believe that Grant is more valuable as shopped on the trade market than he is as on the roster into the future. Not because he's in the way, but precisely because he's a 6'8" forward who can really shoot it. And I think on a better team with a more defined role and more incentive, you would see Jerami Grant a little more locked in, a little more turned up, and you're still getting a guy who can pretty easily score 20 and shoot 40% from 3 in an NBA game. The question is, what is his trade value? And what are the Blazers willing to give up for it? I believe that the Blazers should actively try to trade Jerami Grant for the reasons I just laid out. I don't know if they share that. I don't think the front office shares my urgency or even my view that the Jerami Grant must be traded. The way that they have slow played this is either like a real appreciation of patience and knowing that they can get a deal, or maybe an active admission that their view of what their players are worth is not what the market deems them to be worth. And I think we'll kind of see the truth of that play out over the next 12 months or so, because they got some vets that they probably need to shop one way or another. So part of my expectations for Jerami Grant is that he's probably not on the team when we do this next season, and that is the right move. We're going to get to the end of the year, and I'm going to revisit my predictions from the fall. I'm going to bring Michael from the past on the show, and Michael from the past might just not talk about Jerami Grant because Jerami Grant might not be here. It would be a very reasonable expectation that Jerami Grant gets traded. It's just, what does he get traded for? If the Blazers are demanding 2 unprotected first-round picks, Jerami Grant might still be on the roster. If they kind of realize that one really valuable first, or even moderately valuable first, and an intriguing youngster could get it done, or if they find the right price, if you find the right buyer, a team that thinks they're really close and views Jerami Grant as their PJ Washington. PJ Washington, of course, traded from Charlotte to Dallas. Dallas is PJ unlocks what Dallas wants to do. He helps morph them into it, along with a couple Daniel Gafford upgrade and Derek Lively coming into his own. But They morphed into a very good defensive team after the trade deadline, and freaking PJ Washington hit 6 3-pointers in a Western Conference semifinal game. He was awesome. If a team views Jerami Grant as a potential PJ Washington-esque upgrade, a guy who can put you over the top in a tertiary role, then maybe the Blazers do end up cashing out. But it depends on what their asking price is. Grant can help a good team win, and he can help the Blazers be more functional. But for where the Blazers are, Grant is just more valuable as a trade piece than he is as a starting forward. So while I think Grant, while he's around, will do a lot of things to help, the best thing in my eyes to root for Jerami Grant is that he changes teams. He moves cities, he gets a new job, and he helps another team be competitive, and the Blazers in return get a couple draft picks, whatever that might look like, and a young player to take a rebuilding type flyer on that allows them some sort of flexibility and some maybe a chance to cash out on a youngster moving forward. I'm ready for the Blazers to be the team that acquires good players, not the team that trades them away. But I'll say this. The Blazers, for the most part, have prioritized acquiring players under contract. Rob Williams, Malcolm Brogdon, DeAndre Ayton, Toumani Camara, Denny Avdia, all of the players they've traded for in the last 2 years, or last 15 months under Joe Cronin, have been young players or veterans, depending on the sort of Toumani versus Malcolm split, like players under contract, players with years remaining on their deals. So perhaps the Blazers view Jerami Grant and his $30 million as a chance to add multiple players under contract moving into the future. I think that might be the disconnect between what I think the Blazers should do and what the front office MO has generally been. So perhaps Jerami Grant, the expectation is Jerami Grant becomes 2 functional players moving into the future. All right, that is going to do it for today's show and my expectations and season preview for Jerami Grant. Come back for tomorrow's show. It's what we do 5 days a week, wherever you get podcasts, and also on YouTube, free on all platforms. Tell your friends about the program. I appreciate you listening. I'll talk to you soon.